This is a 2007 Chrysler Sebring. I'm going to replace the rotors and brakes on it. First thing, get your jack stand, get those out. Pop off the cap on your brake reservoir so that the pressure can come out when you compress the caliper. And then you're going to jack it up right there by the pinch weld, and then put a safety jack stand underneath it after you jack up the vehicle. Before the tire leaves the ground, pop off the cap and take off the lug nuts. It's going to be a 19mm socket on the lug nuts. Once you got all the lug nuts all loose, finger tight, I jack it up and then put the jack stand underneath. Finish taking the lug nuts off and take the wheel off. Sometimes the wheels can be stubborn, especially when they're aluminum. You might have to give it a kick or hit it with a soft blow hammer or something like that to get the wheel off of the hub. If you're just going to change the pads, then you take off this 14mm bolt and then this 14mm bolt right here, and then slide the caliper off after you remove those. If you're going to change the rotors, then you need to remove this bolt right here, and then there's another one on the bottom that's very similar right there. I'm changing both, so I'm going to be removing all 4 of those bolts. That's what the 2 slide pins look like. Now I'm going to take those finish taking the caliper off and then take those other 2 bolts off to get the caliper mounting bracket off. If you have a problem where the caliper won't slide off, just pull on it and it'll compress the caliper, and then the caliper should come off. Don't let your caliper dangle. Put it on a milk crate or box, or zip tie it up or something like that. Next, I'm going to take off these 2 bolts in the back and remove the pads out. Here's the first pad. It's pretty much gone. These original brakes, I think it has 60,000 miles on it, so that's some pretty good pad life. Can't complain about that. I'm going to remove the pad off the back. And there's the inner pad. Those 2 bolts that were on the back were 18mm. I used a little bit of PB Blaster to get them loose. Now I'm going to pop the rotor off, inspect the hub and the bearing, make sure everything's good, and then reinstall the new rotor. To get this rotor off, I basically just beat the snot out of it with a hammer, and it eventually came off. It helps to spray something in there to get everything loose. So the rotor, pretty worn on the inside, a lot of rust. And the bearing seems tight to me, no problems there. So I'll clean this up, put some anti-seize on it, so next time I do a brake job I don't have to hit it with a hammer. New rotors come with like a waxy film on them to keep them from rusting, so you need to clean that off, preferably before you install the new brakes. So I'm going to spray it off with some brake cleaner and then put the anti-seize on the hub. Now that I've got the rotor cleaned and the anti-seize on there, I'm going to install the new rotor. Now I'm going to clean up, wipe off the slide pins. The one with the black plastic piece goes on top. Reinstall those after I get the caliper mounting bracket and those 2 bolts installed. Got the caliper mounting bracket reinstalled with those 2 18mm bolts, and now I'm going to put in the new brake pads, compress the caliper, lube the slide pins, and then put everything back together. Now I'm going to show you how to compress the caliper. Basically, just you can use an old brake pad and put it on there. Preferably don't put the end of the C-clamp on the brake line on the back if you can avoid it. And just slowly compress it. Don't do it all at once, just give it time. Just give it a little quarter turns at a time until it's completely flush. Now all that fluid's going up to that master cylinder, that's why I had you uncap it in the beginning. And there, now it's completely flush under the C-clamp, and you can reinstall the pads and the caliper. Now just slide the new pads into place. Sometimes they can be tricky, other times they just pop right in like that. Pads are in place. Now lubricate the two slide pins, line up the caliper, and then put the two new slide pins in. You get those two bolts tightened down. Make sure everything's in place. Make sure that the rotor is going to be seated all the way up against the wheel hub, and then reinstall your tire and wheel. Reinstall all your lug nuts. After you've got the lug nuts snugged up, you want to do a star pattern like that. Just snug them up as tight as they can by hand. Give the wheel a jiggle, make sure it's on there, and then try it again. Then you're going to remove your jack stand and remove your jack. Make sure your milk crate or whatever you had the caliper resting on is out of the way, and then torque down the wheel. I'm going to do 100 foot-pounds on these lug nuts. Once again, 19 millimeter socket. Always do that star pattern. I like to go through and double check everything. That's good. Those torque down. You got to line up the lug nuts to go into these slots right here, and then pop the cap back on and you're good to go. Now you're going to want to pump the brakes a few times before you go anywhere to get that piston compressed back on the pads, and double check your brake fluid level, and you're good to go.